Usually, when we talk about putting in effort, there's this expectation of momentum. It's like, simple physics.
Right, yeah.
You push a heavy box, it moves forward. You study for a test, your grade goes up. It's supposed to be proportional. Effort in, results out.
We are totally conditioned from a very young age to believe in that comforting equation.
Oh, absolutely.
We want progress to be this straight, predictable line, like you put the coin in the vending machine, you get the snack.
But then you actually try to learn a complex new skill or, fundamentally change your life, and suddenly that physics equation is just completely broken.
It doesn't apply at all.
No, it doesn't. You are pushing with absolutely everything you have. Your muscles are burning, and the box isn't moving a single inch. It's the absolute definition of exhausting.
It really is.
And today we're doing a deep dive into an excerpt called Persistence and the Power of Small Steps to figure out exactly how to bypass that specific breaking point.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating story here about a man named Amir who is trying to learn English.
Right. And whether you, the listener, are trying to pick up a new language or learn to code or get comfortable with public speaking, this scenario is fundamentally a masterclass in the psychology of perseverance. We're looking at what to do when high effort yields zero visible results.
What stands out immediately in Amir's situation isn't a lack of desire. I mean, he wants a better job, he wants more confidence, and he is doing literally everything the self-help industry tells you to do.
He commits.
Exactly. He puts in the daily work, he studies vocabulary, he watches videos. He is aggressively pushing that box.
He is. And the reality he faces is just incredibly harsh because despite all this daily studying behind closed doors, he forgets words almost instantly.
Which is so frustrating.
It's awful. And worse, when he actually tries to speak out loud, his body physically reacts to the stress. Like he feels nervous, his mind goes completely blank, and his voice just shrinks.
Yeah, it's this visceral, really painful disconnect between intense behind-the-scenes effort and real-world execution.
Okay, let's unpack that because it's such an awful feeling to have the information in your head but be totally unable to access it.
Well, let's look at the underlying mechanics of that disconnect because it's rarely a matter of intelligence,
Yeah.
Notice the sequence of his reaction.
Right, the nerves, the blank mind.
Right. He feels nervous, the mind blanks, the voice quiets. That is a textbook physiological response.
Really? Just from trying to speak a new language?
Well, yeah. When we are hyper-focused on a massive end result, like Amir trying to achieve perfect fluency to secure this life-changing job, the pressure we put on ourselves actually creates a biological barrier.
It feels like a computer crashing because you opened way too many heavy programs at once.
That computer analogy is incredibly accurate for how working memory operates. I mean, your brain has limited bandwidth.
Makes sense.
So when Amir steps up to speak, the stakes are so high in his own mind that his amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, just fires up.
Wait, so his nervous system perceives the social situation not as a learning opportunity, but as an actual threat.
A severe threat to his future and his ego.
Wow. So his brain literally goes into fight or flight mode over an English vocabulary word.
Yes. And when that threat response is activated, it hijacks the prefrontal cortex, which is where your working memory lives.
Oh, wow.
So all those vocabulary words he studied, they're encoded in his long-term memory somewhere, but the stress response completely blocks his ability to retrieve them.
Because he's so stressed about being perfect.
Exactly. He is demanding immediate perfection from himself, and the psychological weight of that demand shuts the whole cognitive system down.
It's like pouring water into a leaky bucket. He's doing everything right every single day, but when he actually needs the words, the bucket is empty.
And because no one ever explains the neurology of a cognitive freeze to us, we don't realize it's a bandwidth issue.
We internalize it as a personal failure. We just think, maybe I'm not good enough.
Right. Amir naturally assumes he just isn't smart enough. That biological shutdown is exhausting, which is what drives him straight into the wall.
Which brings us to this breaking point. He sits alone one evening after a long day, deeply disappointed, and for the first time, he actually has the thought, maybe I should stop trying.
It's the feeling of total defeat, that moment where the pain of continuing feels heavier than the pain of giving up.
Yeah.
And it is exactly in that state of exhaustion when his ego is just completely stripped away that he becomes receptive to a completely different paradigm.
Which happens the very next day. Amir is sitting quietly in a small cafe, looking at his phone, just utterly defeated.
Yeah, he's at rock bottom.
And a stranger nearby, this guy named Hassan, just looks at him and says, "You look tired."
It's such a simple thing to say.
But that simple, incredibly observant comment breaks the dam. Amir just opens up and shares all of it. His struggles, his frustration, his deep fear of failing.
And what is remarkable about Hassan's reaction in this moment is his restraint.
He doesn't try to fix it right away.
Exactly. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't offer a language app recommendation or some generic life hack. He provides a neutral, non-judgmental space for Amir to externalize the burden. He just listens.
And then Hassan delivers this grounding piece of advice. He just says, progress is slow, but it's still progress.
That phrase sounds so simple, but the context makes it revolutionary for Amir. Hassan is validating the friction.
Right.
He is essentially saying, when you learn something new, it feels terrible. But feeling terrible doesn't mean you are failing. It just means you are learning.
Okay, I have to stop you there and push back on what happens next, because this is the part of Amir's story that honestly sounds a bit like toxic positivity.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, Hassan asks Amir if he practices every day. Amir says yes, and Hassan replies, then you are already winning.
Right.
Now, if I'm listening to this right now and I'm stuck in my own life, I'm thinking, wait a second. Amir's mind is blanking. He literally cannot speak the language. He is failing his own tests daily. How can anyone look at that and call it winning?
I completely understand that skepticism. It does feel contradictory. But the answer lies in Hassan's brilliant follow-up.
What does he say?
Well, when Amir questions him, basically asking exactly what you just asked, Hassan smiles and says, because most people stop. Yeah, this is the core insight of the entire situation. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Hassan is telling Amir, and really telling you, the listener, that the simple, unglamorous act of continuing is the victory.
So winning isn't crossing the finish line. Winning is just staying on the track.
Precisely. Hassan is reframing the very definition of success. Amir was measuring success by how flawlessly he could speak.
Right, the perfection metric.
But Hassan shifts the metric entirely to persistence. By simply waking up and trying again, Amir is already outlasting the majority of people who let the cognitive freeze defeat them.
He normalizes the struggle.
Yes. He makes Amir realize that difficulty isn't a sign that he's broken. Difficulty is just the toll you pay on the road to mastery.
That reframing lifts such a heavy burden because Amir sees the fundamental flaw in his previous approach. He was focusing solely on the end results, completely ignoring the value of his own effort.
He wasn't giving himself any credit for taking the punches.
No, and realizing that forces a complete tactical shift the next day.
He figures out that judging himself solely by the outcome is what was causing the paralysis.
So to fix the paralysis, he has to change the rules of the game he's playing with himself.
Exactly.
Armed with Hassan's advice, Amir decides to try again, but with a radically different mindset. Here's where it gets really interesting. He doesn't change his ultimate goal, but his method completely flips.
He stops rushing.
Yes. He practices speaking, even knowing his sentences are going to be broken. He actively allows himself to make mistakes. Day by day, he builds a new habit.
Not a habit of speaking perfect English.
But a habit of taking small, messy steps. It's like shifting the goalposts. Instead of trying to score a touchdown every time he speaks, he's now just trying to move the ball 1 single inch.
What we are looking at here is the biological incompatibility of perfectionism and learning. To learn a new skill, your brain requires neuroplasticity, the forming of new neural pathways.
Okay.
And that requires repetition. But you can't get repetition if you are paralyzed by the fear of looking foolish. By removing the relentless demand for perfection, Amir stopped fighting his own nervous system.
He turned off the threat detection system we talked about earlier.
Yes. Because he gave himself permission to be messy, the high-stakes threat vanished. His anxiety dropped.
And when anxiety drops,
working memory expands. Suddenly, his brain had the bandwidth to actually recall the vocabulary he had been studying all along. By trying less hard to be perfect, he became more capable.
it makes me think of trying to pave a road. It's like Amir was trying to pave a new road while simultaneously driving a car 100 miles an hour over the wet asphalt.
You can't do it.
You can't. You have to slow down. You have to let the asphalt dry. You have to allow the process to be slow and under construction.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. You have to let the asphalt dry. When Amir lowered his psychological resistance, he allowed his brain the time and space to actually encode the information.
He stopped grading himself on his speed.
Right, and started grading himself on his willingness to just show up and pour the asphalt.
And pouring that asphalt, inch by inch, eventually compounds. Which leads to the real-world test Amir had been dreading and preparing for all along.
The ultimate test.
Weeks pass, and one day, Amir finally speaks in English with someone at work.
But the way it happens is so important.
Yeah, it wasn't a grand cinematic speech. It wasn't him leading a massive corporate meeting in flawless English. The text notes, it was just a short conversation using simple sentences.
But for Amir, it is a massive moment.
Huge. He smiles because he realizes he didn't give up. He proved Hassan's words true. Progress is slow, but it's still progress.
We constantly invalidate our own growth because it doesn't match the idealized cinematic finish line we built in our heads. We hate micro victories.
We do. We dismiss our own short conversations because we're looking for that massive triumph.
But from a neurological standpoint, micro victories are absolutely essential. When Amir has that short, simple conversation, his brain releases dopamine.
Oh, interesting.
And that dopamine is the chemical fuel required to maintain motivation for the long haul. If we refuse to celebrate the small steps because they aren't massive triumphs, we actually starve our brain of the neurochemical fuel needed to keep going.
So what does this all mean? We refuse to celebrate the inch because it isn't a mile. But Amir's smile in that moment isn't just about the English language.
It's the realization of his own resilience.
Exactly. He survived the cognitive freeze.
This does raise a very practical question, though. How do we actually sustain ourselves when the ultimate goal is still, years away?
Because Amir is still not perfectly fluent. The journey is far from over.
Right. There is a vital caveat in the text to this entire philosophy of persistence. Growth takes patience, and you don't need to be perfect, but you also cannot run at a dead sprint forever.
The text says, rest if you need to, but don't stop.
Yes. Rest if you need to. That feels incredibly important because it gives you an out that isn't quitting.
It's not a failure to rest.
No, I would take that a step further and argue that resting is actually a biological requirement of the small steps process. Burnout happens when we convince ourselves we only have two gears, full speed or full stop.
Oh, that's so true.
We forget there is a third gear, which is pausing. When you sleep or when you take a step back from a problem, your brain is actively consolidating information.
So resting isn't avoiding the work.
Resting is not a failure of the strategy. Resting is a core component of the strategy. You can put the heavy box down for a minute, catch your breath, and then pick it back up. That is still persistence.
That completely changes the paradigm. Every small step matters, and sometimes the most important step you can take is the step back to catch your breath.
It strips away the toxic myth of overnight success and replaces it with the quiet, sustainable dignity of just showing up day after day, allowing yourself to be a work in progress.
Allowing yourself to be a work in progress. Amir's journey really is a blueprint for anyone feeling stuck. It teaches us to separate our effort from immediate visible results.
And to embrace the awkwardness.
Yes, the deeply frustrating reality of making mistakes, knowing that lowering the stakes actually helps our brains perform better.
And most importantly, it reminds us that the only true failure is being one of the most people who simply stop trying.
If you're still trying, you're outlasting the friction. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final challenge based directly on Amir's breakthrough in that cafe.
I love this part.
Think about the biggest, most frustrating challenge you're currently facing in your own life right now. The exact thing that's making you feel not good enough, where you're pouring in effort and seeing zero results.
The box that won't move.
Yes, the heavy box. What would happen if for the next 30 days you completely ignored the final goal? What if you totally detached from the need for visible results and instead only measured your willingness to show up and make imperfect, messy mistakes every single day?
Just showing up.
What if moving the box just 1 inch, or even just keeping your hands on the box, was enough? Because remember, progress is slow, but it's still progress.
And as long as you haven't stopped, you are already winning.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep going, one small, imperfect step at a time.